The poopy bags for the dog.
Don't say I never gave you anything.
Thank you. I'm gonna really appreciate this. I don't leave home without a poop bag, so thank you.
Can I eat that bed tonight? I told him this morning he can sing, but that boy, bless his heart. I told him this morning if anybody got a girl child that need a good man, let me know. I got one for them.
Slide that a little closer so you.
Do you need one of these?
Oh, not the.
Yeah.
You know what? Yeah, there you go. Watch the point there.
You got one? That'd be awesome. Yes, ma'am. Because mine, for some reason, didn't want to cooperate today. It was being ugly.
One in my purse.
I carried two. Then I left a little piece somewhere.
That's in the bag, in the computer bag, and one's in my purse.
And then when you leave a little piece, people act like you didn't leave something. It's like, did you see my little piece from my... No. You didn't see it. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, just so you can stand back.
That's so I can walk, because you know I get hyper. Okay, where your little piece at to plug in?
Sent me a text and said she's okay, and so, one of the first pieces will be the 37.
So I just connect this? Oh, yours?
But they're gonna show the video 7 days.
Yeah, that's good. I'm trying to see.
First,
How you work this? Oh, on.
hold on.
And it says connect. So you should be connected because this is your baby.
Oh, you're talking about mine? Turn the switch on. Did you pull the thing out and stick it in?
That's what I'm looking for. Is it back here?
Here.
That's where it is. They gonna they had the heck out of that bad boy.
Yes, and let me know when you get it in and I'll turn it on.
All right, Facebook is on.
Okay.
So we need to. Yeah, we're ready. We're gonna do the movie first.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
We're gonna do the movie.
So you can.
And it's only 8
I
minutes.
have it on.
Oh, honey, I know about the
You know how to do it?
about the seven
Yeah.
7 days. Mm-hmm.
Did you?
That's 7 days.
Yours down. Yeah, just shrink it down. One more. Was that your video?
No. Oh, wait a minute, go to the. No, where the.
Hey,
The front door in to City Hall. The main door right in front where the.
they might need me for fair housing too.
Yeah, we'll get it.
All right. Well, my name is Charlene Green. I am the manager for the Office of Human Rights. We're going to get started. I want to introduce my coworker, Todd Niemeyer. Say hey, Todd. Todd is my coworker, so we make up the staff for the Office of Human Rights. And we are celebrating or acknowledging Fair Housing Month. April every year is Fair Housing Month. And this year is special because it is the 50th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act. It's kind of mind-boggling for me to think, and especially when I share this information with my son, that in my lifetime, there wasn't fair housing for everyone in the United States. And so when Martin Luther King was assassinated, Lyndon Johnson pushed through some legislation that enabled the Fair Housing Act to be a part of the civil rights laws that affect our country. And so we've got a video that gives you a little bit of that history so that we can put it all in context. And then after we show the video, then I'm going to introduce Shelley Murphy from the Piedmont Housing Alliance, who will share a few words and then introduce our guest speaker.
Few in the nation believe that fair housing would in our time become the unchallenged law of this land. And indeed, this bill has had a long and stormy trip.
Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man.
Ladies and gentlemen, Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis.
The death of the prophet of nonviolence set off the worst outbreak of arson, looting, and criminal activity in the nation's history. Washington's ghettos burned within a few blocks of the nation's capital.
The life of a man who symbolized the freedom and faith of America has been taken. And no words of mine can fill the void of the eloquent voice that has been stilled. But this I do believe deeply. The dream of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has not died with him.
President Johnson was willing to speak up and say, we have to pass a fair housing bill.
Hello, Mr. President? Yes, Dick. We're in trouble. We need some help. Yes? I was afraid of that.
Federal troops, for the first time since the Civil War, took up positions to guard government buildings.
Nothing's probably touchier than your own neighborhood and your own home or your own apartment. The administration, which supported the bill, said this has no chance. The other stuff is okay, but this will kill any politician that touches it.
Well, I just could not live beside them. I don't feel that they should be oppressed. But I moved here because it was a white community.
I have 2 daughters and 2 sons. And if there's too many colored people around here, I definitely will get out.
I think that, well, the property values will immediately go down if they're allowed to move in here in any number.
It seems as though our country is pulling apart into separate societies, where whites have jobs and Negroes have unemployment, where the middle class lives in suburbs and the poor are left in the ghettos, where one group of Americans looks upon another group of Americans with growing mistrust and even dread.
Then the bill went over into the House Rules Committee, and under the chairmanship of the famous Judge Smith, a right-wing segregationist from Virginia, he wouldn't hold hearings on it. He would take the bill home so nobody could act on it, and we were running out of time.
Thousands flowed through the rainy streets of Memphis this day, finishing a march that Dr. King planned to lead in support of striking garbage workers.
How many men must die before we can really have a free and true and peaceful society?
Cause you're a present Lord. And I know you'll reach out and take mine. You take our hand.
The death of Martin Luther King is a tragic thing, but no legislation should be passed as a memorial to anyone.
In spite of the riots, I am going to support this legislation with all the vigor that I possess.
The laws that we pass up here are for all time. The Martin Luther Kings come and go.
The public reaction to this horror gave the sensible members of the committee a compelling argument that the House Rules Committee had to report that bill out. And I think that's how we got our bill. They just didn't dare bottle it up any longer.
And I have a dream that one day Negroes will be able to buy a house anywhere that their money will carry them.
At long last this afternoon, fair housing for all is now a part of the American way of life. Democracy's work is being done, and the bell of freedom rings out a little louder. We have come some of the way, not near all of it.
The fight still goes on because we unfortunately have the laws, but we don't have the enforcement. That we have changed, but we still have the same kinds of discrimination.
The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights said today that efforts by federal agencies to end housing discrimination have been generally superficial or incomplete.
President Carter has ordered federal agencies to use all means possible to strengthen fair housing programs.
For the first time, people with disabilities and families with children will be protected from housing discrimination.
President Reagan signed legislation today designed to toughen up the nation's fair housing laws.
Why did you take part in this demonstration today? Just because there was a huge crowd, or did you have any personal reason?
Well, I took part in this march today because of Martin Luther King and what he stood for, because this march is what he died for.
You know what he stood for?
Yes. He stood for nonviolence and peace for all men of all kinds. And I think if he died for it, I could carry out what he started.
right. So that was a great way to open up this discussion about tenants' rights, your rights, fair housing, what the fair housing law is all about, and the word that stood out for me was enforcement. And I know that that's something we want to be able to do more of here in Charlottesville. We're working on that, but the folks who are really carrying the water for the state of Virginia are the folks in Richmond in the Fair Housing Office. And so to talk more about what we're trying to do here locally, and to introduce one of the folks who is responsible for the enforcement out of Richmond for the state of Virginia regarding housing discrimination. I'm going to introduce now Ms. Shelley Murphy.
I have the great pleasure of introducing Mahalia, and we know her as Mally Mason. She comes to us with over 15 years with the Office of Fair Housing out of Richmond, and that position requires extensive knowledge of the Fair Housing Act, Virginia, as well as the federal act. And she gives seminars across the Commonwealth in English and in Spanish. And also, she's very innovative as far as how she does our teaching. Those of us that are HUD-approved housing counselors have to go through Mally's training in order to get certified in fair housing. So I would like to welcome the expert to come up and join us and talk to us about the Fair Housing Act regarding tenancy. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you all so much. When people say that I'm an expert, it makes me nervous, because then I'm expected to do great things. But thank you all for having me here in Charlottesville, and I'm really excited about Miss Charlene and working with Miss Shelley, and we're going to do so many things. You did me a great favor by putting this video up there, and I want to read something to you. Bad policing practices, a flawed justice system, unscrupulous consumer credit practices, poor or inadequate housing, high unemployment, voter suppression, and other culturally embedded forms of racial discrimination all converge to propel violent upheaval on the streets of African American neighborhoods in American cities, north and south, east and west. And as black unrest arose, it inadequately trained police officers and National Guard troops entered affected neighborhood, often worsening the violence. When did that happen? When was that written? That was written 50 years ago. That was part of the Kerner Commission. And if we took that Kerner Commission that was released February 29th, 1968, and we put it into today, April 25th, 2018, we're talking about the exact same thing. And that's what's so painful about having to deal with the discrimination that is so engraved in this country. What I brought was the highlights, and hopefully I'll be able to hit you up with some good information. So we're going to talk about the 50 years, and just as a disclaimer, what I talk about is the law. It's hard as a woman not to give advice, but I'm not supposed to give advice. If you need advice, you have to go to an attorney that knows some fair housing. And I tell folks all the time, you want to find that attorney that knows some fair housing. It's just like a doctor. Each one of them have their specialty. That attorney should be the one to tell you exactly what you would need to do. This is the actual signing of the Fair Housing Act done by President Johnson. And if you look to the very left of that picture, there's a gentleman, one gentleman of color, and his name is Edward Brooke. He was one of the authors of the bill that was introduced. Edward Brooke was also a veteran of the military that came back and attempted to buy a house in his state of Massachusetts and was not able to do so, mainly because of the color of his skin. Now remember, he had the GI Bill and all that stuff going on, but we know that the soldiers of color were not treated equally as the soldiers who were white. So when Edward Brooke came back, he decided to run for office, and he won by popular vote. So it was him and Walter Mondale from opposite sides of the aisle that actually got together and put this bill through, but it didn't go through for 2 years. What they didn't do in 2 years, they did in 7 days when Martin Luther King's assassination occurred, because then it was chaos and something had to be done. So President Johnson, even though he didn't read the Kerner Commission report, he was the one who said we have to send a message out to the community that change is coming. This bill was done in honor of Martin Luther King. So when the law was passed, it was done in his honor. And I believe that was the very first time that they actually named the law in honor of a person. And it's become something of a tradition now, that if someone's life is sacrificed, whatever the mission is, they may name that law in their name. So we are 50 years old. But we need to look at the reality of this. We're 50 years old, but this country has been around for a long time. And in fact, the first black person that landed here in Virginia landed here would be 400 years next year. So you're thinking about 400 years. What happened to the 350 years that we still needed housing all that time? What happened to the Native Americans that were here that we sometimes don't hear about anymore? One of the terms you'll hear me use a lot tonight is protected class. When I talk about protected class, it's a term that is used in anti-discrimination law. It is referring to a group of people that even though they're not related, they do share certain characteristics. Because of those characteristics, they may be targeted for discrimination or harassment. So when we look at the protected classes that we have, this is the federal fair housing protected classes. And when the law was first enacted, there were only 4 protected classes, because at the time, the discrimination was mostly against the Africans who were no longer slaves, but I guess some people forgot it. It was written in 1866, the Civil Rights Act of 1866, no longer slaves. The law now protects you as well as it will be enforced against you, just like those who were once your slave owners. So race and color was important for protection. National origin. When we look at national origin, that was because of the Chinese, the Mexicans, and the Irish that came here, and the things that they dealt with. Many don't realize that the Irish were also put under scrutiny. They dealt with a lot of discrimination. And in fact, the first person that talked anything about fair housing was President Kennedy. And what did he have in common with the Irish? He was Irish, he was Catholic, and they knew what discrimination was about. So who best to introduce a bill to protect you from discrimination than somebody that has been through it? So I want you to know also that it's really shocking to me that the people who were here, who are part of this land, are considered national origin, and that's the Native Americans. So is that saying that those who came here and built the generations up are more Native than the Native Americans? Because the Native Americans have dealt with more discrimination than anything else. It's kind of hard for it to have been your land and it's taken away from you, and the way it was taken away. Now, religion. Let's talk about religion, because sometimes we seem to forget what the Constitution said. It said we keep religion and state separate. Those who came here were escaping religious persecution. The last thing they were thinking about was bringing religious persecution here. But when we look at what is going on, sometimes we see that it still exists. Now, let's talk about sex. 1974. How many years is that? It's only 44 years that women have had protection. The people with the power in this country for all those years were white men. So women didn't have the power that they had. Yet, when you look at the video, who spoke out the loudest about integrating communities? It were people who weren't even protected yet. So, thankfully, because of the protection that says that male and female are the same, even though sometimes we're really not, but at least it says so on the paper, because of that protection, women are able to go to work, women are able to own their homes, and I've heard the stories. I had one lady told me that she was divorced, had 2 daughters, attempted to buy a house, 1972, $15,000 in the bank, and they would not sell her a house. She married her then boyfriend for 30 days. More than one way to skin that cat. And bought her house. Yeah. So look at all the things that women had to go through. And let's talk about adult communities. It says you had to be 18 years old to live in that community, right? No children allowed. So what if you fell in love and you got pregnant? Do you see where we're coming from? So now they can't do that, right? Families. How long have women been having babies? Then how comes families have only been protected for the last 29 years? People don't see, sometimes when we look at a law, we think, oh my gosh, that is so crazy. Why do we even need a housing law? Well, if you hear the stories I hear, young man told me that his mother had to sneak him into the house, him and his siblings. They couldn't let the landlord know that they were living there. Back in those days, landlords used to come to the house and get the rent. So he had to hide under the bed so that they wouldn't get, ooh, your water ran away. They had to hide under the bed. That is too cute. Not an animal, that was cute. Oh my gosh. But yeah, families with children, thankfully now there is some semblance of protection, but there's still a lot of discrimination taking place in that. So how about disability? Has disability just been a new thing? Seems like you have to have some kind of disability to go out of this world at some point, something. There is more likelihood that you will have a disability than not. Yet, we discriminate against so many with disabilities. We've hidden people with disabilities, put them in institutions. When people know that you have some type of mental disability, it's oh my gosh. So people, individuals with disabilities have dealt with this discrimination. And in fact, when we look at the percentages, disability is the #1 in complaints. Here in Virginia, our law says pretty much the same as the federal law, except one of the things that the federal law did was to say, if you have a fair housing entity in your jurisdiction, that entity could go ahead and establish other protected classes if necessary. So here in Virginia, we have the 7 of the federal law, which is race, color, religion, national origin, sex, elderliness, familial status, and disability is what we prefer to use. And once we were allowed to add to our law, we added elderliness, which was really cool. And I'm still trying to figure out what the thought process was that in 1983 we added elderliness. If you go to Roanoke to visit, they've added, because they have a fair housing, council out there. If you go to Fairfax County, they've added to their law too, because they have fair housing out there. Both of them added marital status, because Virginia, like many of the southern states, don't allow cohabitation. Did y'all know that? You shall not cohabitate if you're not married. It's shocking to some people, but it is on the books. And so if a landlord decides they don't want to rent to you because you're not married, there's nothing our office could do, except if you're in Fairfax County or in Roanoke, then those offices can fight that discrimination. Roanoke also has age as a protected class, because you are protected from birth to 18 under familial status. You're protected from 55 till you die under elderliness. 19 to 54, no protection. So a landlord can say, I don't rent to 19-year-olds. Nothing we could do. We say, oh, I'm sorry. But in Roanoke, the Roanoke courts would have to handle that complaint, okay? In order to get the law through, they negotiated exemptions. Everyone wasn't happy about this, but at the time it was a crisis. So they were willing to give and take. So part of the giving was the exemptions. The first one says, if you have 3 single-family homes or less, and you would like to rent them or sell them, you could do so as long as you keep it in a private negotiation. It can't be public. It also says that if you're like Mrs. Murphy decided that she lived in a building of 4 units or less. She said, if I'm living there, I would like to have control of whom I would allow to live in my building. At that time, 1968, you're looking at not 24-hour news, so you didn't know most of what was going on. She says, more than likely, if I allow someone that is a stranger in my building, they could hurt me. Well, I watch ID Channel. That may not be true today. But at least it worked in 1968. So you have to physically live in the building, and then you'll get the exemption. Number 3 says, if you decide that you want to rent or sell your single-family home, and you want to do it without regulation, you can do so as long as you do not hire a real estate agent or a broker. The minute you hire either one of those, they have to disclose that they're licensed 24/7. Now, these 3 can still get in trouble. Number 1, you could look at them putting an ad in a newspaper. They could put a sign out. Once you put it out there, it's public. So if it's discriminatory, it's subjected to scrutiny. The other way is using the Civil Rights Act of 1866. And when you go back to the Civil Rights Act of 1866, they also mention housing in there. And the protected classes are race, color, religion, and national origin. So if the discrimination is based on any of those 4, you could also use that law. Religious organizations can have their own communities as long as it's non-public. So a Baptist church could decide to have a Baptist community. They have to understand that you would only allow Baptists there, but you can't discriminate on what Baptist. So if there's a Baptist with children, a Baptist with disability, a Baptist that is Chinese, you have to allow them in. The other protected classes still remain. The only exemption is the religion. Now, if they made it public, they cannot specify what religion can live there, okay? So it has to be non-public. Did you know that your schools are also regulated? The dorms, they're regulated also. The only exemption they get is sex. So boys and girls aren't allowed to share the same room, but they may share the same floor. So we parents are very happy about that. Extremely happy about that. Elderly communities, now you know the elderly, we're just awesome. We don't die, we multiply, is what I say. We are 10,000 strong seniors every day. 10,000 citizens turn 65 every day. The baby boomers generation was a busy generation. It's so busy that they have predicted that in the year 2030, we will outnumber the young people. And that's scary, because we need young people around to take care of us old people. Just want you to know. But elderly communities are a hype. You know, they're really cool. And they actually can discriminate against families with children. So sometimes I would get calls and they would say, well, I went to this property and they wouldn't let me move in. And I said, is it an elderly property? And they go, yeah. I said, well, that they are legit properties. And I'm sorry that they wouldn't let you move in. But when you turn 55, we'll be more than happy to welcome you. So disability or handicap is the number one reason and the number one in complaints. When I first started in 2003, it was neck and neck. It would be race by, a margin. Then the next time it would be disability, but back and forth. Now disability has just taken off. So the first thing we need to understand is, what is disability? So according to the law, we just piggybacked on the ADA. It didn't make any sense to create a whole other law when the Americans with Disabilities Act already had a law that was easy to use. So the first definition says you have to have an impairment. But not just have that impairment has to affect or limit one or more major life activities. So when I do my classes, I tell people about diabetes, because only in the South do you hear it called sugar diabetes. So if you have the sugar, and you're taking care of yourself, according to this law, you don't have a disability. If you have the sugar and you've lost a leg, or you've lost your renal function, or you're going blind, then you have a disability. So one or more major life activities have to be affected. It also says that if you have a record somewhere of that impairment, that way we can go back and say, well, do you have a doctor that can verify this? Do you have a psychiatrist, caseworker, social worker, peer support group, even a family member? Because there are many family members that take care of their moms and their children. The last one is, or being regarded as having such an impairment. And most times, this is about people's perception. So I often have to remind housing providers not to bring their own perceptions in. Because in doing so, you run the risk of doing something even though you didn't intentionally mean to do it. But if the result is discriminatory, you have violated the law. So what this is saying about regarded as having an impairment is saying that if a person seems to have an impairment, they may have a twitch or some funny habit, and you think they have a mental disability. They don't need to be diagnosed with that mental disability. Just your perception and the way you treat them is enough to give them protection of the law. So we have to be real careful. Of course, my bald head always get people asking questions. You all right? Do you have? No, I chose to do this. It's not mutilation, it's freedom. And I'm fine, okay? So, and it was before Okoye. They based her after me. They saw fierce all over that bald head. So the law says that you can't intentionally discriminate against someone that has a disability. But it also doesn't give you a pass if you unintentionally discriminate. Remember that ignorance of the law cannot be used as a defense. What the law says is that when it comes to shelter and housing providers, unlike what so many housing providers would tell their staff, treat everyone exactly the same. What this law says is that when it comes to people with disabilities, you're going to have to make changes, exceptions, and adjustments to rules, policies, services, and even structures so that they can have the same opportunity to use and enjoy housing like anyone else. Those changes are known as reasonable accommodations and reasonable modifications. The one that gives the most trouble is the reasonable accommodations, because what it does is it confuses people. You have a resident that comes up to a housing provider and they say, excuse me, I need to request a parking space that is allotted to me and to me only. If the person doesn't know fair housing, they would say, we can't do that. It's a first come, first serve. But the law says that you have to make changes. So what's a reasonable accommodation? And under the Fair Housing Act, it says, and I read this one because it's so profuse, a reasonable accommodation is a change in rules, policies, practices, or services so that a person with a disability will have an equal opportunity to use and enjoy a dwelling unit or common space. A housing provider should do everything he or she can to assist, but he or she is not required to make changes that would fundamentally alter the program or create undue financial and administrative burden. There's an and between financial and administrative. It's not an or, so you have to do both. Reasonable accommodations may be necessary at all stages of the housing process, including application, tenancy, and to prevent eviction. So they're very clear as to what this is supposed to do. We made it very simple for Virginia. You're going to make changes to rules, policies, services, practices that are necessary to allow the person with the disability to have equal opportunity to use and enjoy housing and all the amenities that's on there. If the property is a federally funded property, like with your subsidized housing and all that, they have to adhere to an extra law, and that is called Section 504 of the 1973 Rehabilitation Act. That says that when you're dealing with a federally funded property, any change, including structural changes, is what they're going to allow. And the reason why they put it under reasonable accommodations is because reasonable accommodations do not require any payments from any of the residents requesting. This is done on the property's dime, not the residents. Okay? So, when can you deny a reasonable accommodation? When that accommodation poses an undue financial and administrative burden. There's that and. You don't have enough money and you have to pull your staff away from doing something that they should be doing as part of the housing process. The other reason is that whatever they're asking for fundamentally alters the nature of the program. Very simple. If the housing provider doesn't provide that service, they shouldn't have to do it. So if a resident were to ask a housing provider to come and clean their apartment, it's not a service that they provide. But they can provide them resources to find someone that would come in and do that service for them that they would arrange themselves. Of all the reasonable accommodations, the animals are the most popular. And it's so cool. Many don't realize that animals do play a huge role when it comes to people with disabilities. Before I identify these animals, I'll tell you all a little story. I had a dog. It was a Boston Terrier. I paid some money for that dog. But that dog I named him Lyle Alzado, and my daughter still says that the reason the dog was so crazy is because I named him Lyle Alzado. If you know who Lyle Alzado was, he was the football player for the Raiders, and the Raiders is my team. The dog would jump. I mean, he would just be spaz. He would get so excited, he would wet all on himself. We fixed him, and it still didn't work. So I said, maybe this dog needs some love. So I asked around who would like to have a full-blooded Boston Terrier. He's fixed, but he's pedigree. And this lady told me she had 17 grandchildren, and I said, oh my gosh, that's perfect. These kids will wear that dog to the dirt. There's no way he can, outrun these kids. So I gave her the dog, and about 2 weeks later, I said to her, how's Zato doing? She said, girl, I took him to Mama's house. He hasn't left. I said, what are you talking about? She said, I took him to my mother's house. The dog is still at my mother's house. I said, but it's 2 weeks later. She said, I don't think I can take the dog from her. 2 weeks after that, I saw her again, and she said, I have got to tell you. I took Mama to the doctor, and when she went there, the doctor asked her what was different. And she says, nothing. And he said, no, something is different because your sugar level went down, your blood pressure went down, and you look so much happier. And while the lady was standing there listening to the doctor, she said, oh my goodness, I know why. Her mother did not get out of bed. But when that dog got there, she had a duty. And she would take that dog and put him on her wheelchair. The wheelchair she didn't want to run around the neighborhood in, and put that dog on the wheelchair and take him outside for his walks. And the dog will come right back and want to be on her lap. And she said, and when my baby is sitting beside me, can nobody come near me because he is protecting Big Mama. So when we talk about these animals, we have to realize that just because it doesn't work for you doesn't mean it doesn't work for others. So let me introduce you to what we call assistance animals. Under ADA, you have service animals. Service animals have to have a duty, a specific duty. So if a service animal is for a person that is blind, they're guiding that person, okay? The only two animals allowed under ADA are dogs and horses, and they are the miniature horses. So dogs come in various breeds, and what dogs can do is just a myriad of things. They can tell you if you have cancer, high blood pressure, epilepsy. They can warn you about things that are going to happen, like the young lady with panic attacks. Her miniature pinscher knows when she's going to have a panic attack, gets on her lap, puts a paw on each shoulder, calms her down. The horse grows no more than 36 inches tall. Smallest one to date is 14 inches tall. They can see 350 degrees in complete darkness. They can guide you through any type of weather. And the beauty of them is that they live a long time and they can work for a long time. So one horse may be transferred around depending on the need. If one person passes, then the horse will be passed on to someone else. They wear sneakers. You have to see them, cute as can be. They also go on command, which is really cool, and I actually saw them do that. They go on, you say, it's time for you to do something, and they do it. I was like, wow, that's amazing. So when housing providers ask the question, a horse inside the house, they're trained. Believe me, they're trained. The monkey, what do monkeys have that people have? Fingers. Yeah, digits, exactly. So monkeys can open refrigerator, get food out, warm it up in the microwave, turn on lights, pick things up off the floor, bring you the phone. They change the TV channel for you. People who have lost the use of their arms and their legs, the monkeys become their arms and legs. These videos are online. You can always video these service animals and look at the different videos that they have. There's a really cool one called, I say it's Sophie the Service Monkey. Sophie and Judy, and that's a real tear jerker, but amazing little monkeys. Sure.
These service animals for people with disabilities, would insurance pay for them? You have to pay out of pocket.
Pay for the animals? Yeah. Oh, no, you're going to have to pay your own animal.
No, I'm just thinking, with disabilities, true disabilities.
Well, most times people with disabilities, it depends on whether they do want an animal or not. But in the case of the monkey and the horse, that's a special organization. They're a charity. So, they always accept payment, but they don't charge people for these animals. Yeah. The cat gives off pheromones, and they make you happy. So they say many of the folks dealing with epilepsy, if they rub on the cat, the pheromones relax them, and it helps them not to have all those seizures. I don't too much like anything that looks like a rat. So yes, I have the ferret up there, but I'm not I don't like anything that looks like a rat. But if the ferret is going to help you, and they say that it helps people that have epilepsy, it can tell you when you're going to have a seizure. But folks have told me that they stink and all this, and I'm like, I'm not getting close enough to know if they stink. My favorite, though, is the parrot. And I was very dubious about Sadie. Sadie, when I heard there was a service bird, I went like anyone else. What? A service bird? But then I realized it was an African gray. Sadie was in a pet store, and she cussed. So they hid her away so that she wouldn't upset anybody. So Mr. Eggers has bipolar disorder, and he would have psychotic episodes. So I believe that the pet store owner decided maybe if I put them together, they'll help each other out. Well, he was right. Because now, when he's going to have a psychotic episode, Sadie knows. And before it escalates, Sadie talks him out of it. I love you. It's okay. Let's breathe. 1, 2, and she talks him out of it. If you know anything about African grays speak a lot, and they imitate people. And at the end of the class, I'm going to have to play you all the parrots video. So, 2 questions that a person is going to have to answer if they would like to have an animal, or they need to have an animal to help them have use and enjoyment of housing. The first question is, do you have a disability? The second question is going to be, if you have that disability, does your disability require you to have the assistance of an animal? So someone is going to have to answer that question. And the reason why I told you all that story about the family is because if it were a case that the housing provider didn't allow that lady to have the dog, the doctor would have been one that would have said, but this dog made a difference for her. And the daughter would have been the other one to testify and say, Mama now gets out of bed and takes the dog for walks. So something is positive about that dog being there. When it comes to assistance, emotional support, or companion animals, they pay no deposit and no rent. They are considered as one with that person. They do not have to provide certificates. Housing providers are told you do not accept certificates. What you accept is a letter from someone that is reliable that can attest to the fact that that person needs that animal. They can be any size, any breed, any weight. They cannot be a threat to people or property. If they are a threat, the housing provider can hand them a 2130, telling them that they need to modify the behavior of the dog, or they're going to have to ask them to remove the animal from the property. You have to have rules. If you don't have rules, people are going to run wild, run free. So you have to have rules. Rules are going to include, there has to be noise control. If a dog is barking day and night, then apparently to me, you don't have an assistance animal, because then how do you know when that person is in real trouble? Leash law is needed. It's in place, and you have to have the animal on a leash. Can't just open the door and let them go. The housing provider can require that every year shot records and license are updated. And oh, by the way, folks, we now have a new way to find out if the person didn't clean up after their dog poopy. It's called DNA. They DNA the dogs. They take a swab of the cheek of the dog and they put it on record. If the dog poopy and you don't scoopy, they get a sample, they send it to the lab, and then if the lab matches it, that person is going to pay for the test and pay a fine for not picking up after the animal. And there's nothing more disgusting than going on a nice property and seeing a pile of you know what around. Residents have to have control and take care of the animal. So I always suggest that, maybe they have a second name, whether it's a pet or an assistance animal. Because if you don't make it home in time, somebody, if something happens and you can't make it home, someone needs to come and take care of the animal. That's not for the housing provider to do. And of course, residents have to be reminded that at the end of tenancy, whatever they have destroyed above and beyond normal wear and tear is their responsibility to pay for. Look at that. Isn't that the cutest thing? We do have a guide. I'm going to send this presentation. No, I'm going to leave it on your top. And then you can share it, in Adobe. I only send it to them in Adobe. So you can share it with whomever is here tonight, and they can take a look at this. This is actually the guide to reasonable accommodation requests for assistance animals that was written by DPOR. Our lawyer wrote it up. Hot topic. What's the hot topic? Hoarding. Yes. Hoarding is a disability. And every time I have a hoarding workshop, it is packed. I don't know what it is, but it's something about somebody's misery that everybody wants to see. As my slide says, one man's garbage is another man's gold. Okay? Now, hoarding is more than collecting. A lot of times folks would say to me, I have a lot of stuff. The issue with hoarding is not having a lot of stuff. When you're hoarding is when you cannot get rid of what you have, no matter how insignificant it is. If you're sweating, if you're getting nervous, your hands shaking, then you have a hoarding problem, but you don't have one. And oh, by the way, if you did have a hoarding problem, you wouldn't tell us. Okay? 6% of the world's population hoards. That blew my mind because I thought it was only an American thing. Elderly women are more likely to hoard, especially if they lived during the Depression. They're going to hold on to everything. Landlords must make reasonable accommodations, even if you don't ask for it. When a landlord walks into the home of a person that is hoarding, there is no doubt that you know that something is going on, okay? Early intervention is the best offense. I say to housing providers, anytime you see a place that gets that bad, somebody dropped the ball. Because housing providers have the right to go in and do inspections. And part of your Landlord-Tenant Act requires good housekeeping. And that's something that they signed on. So if you are going in and doing inspections, if you're doing filter changes, you need to keep up with looking at the place and letting them know if something is going on, especially if you're dealing with an elderly community, because that community is going to have, more than likely, several who are hoarding. This is a mental disease, and anybody can have it. Something traumatic in your life can change to the point where you start hoarding. One of the videos that I saw that broke my heart, this lady had 2 husbands that died naturally. And she had a child that was also sick and died. And she felt like anyone that she loved, they died. She started hoarding. And it put her in a precarious situation because she was getting ready to lose her children. But her depression was so bad. I wish I could play it so you could see her face and how, she's crying and just, you knew something was definitely wrong. But I say to housing providers, behind all that stuff that you see in the house is a human being. a human being that is crying out for help. On June 21st, we are going to have a hoarding workshop in Richmond. I am planning to have experts there. When I say the experts, I'm talking about psychologists, psychiatrists, organizer, people who have worked. Sure. Yeah. So that we can, have a full day's discussion. So it would be probably like from 10 in the morning to like 3 in the afternoon. But I'm hoping to do a lot of talking about the hoarding and getting more information, and if we can find out about help around for those who hoard. Reasonable modifications under this law means that you're looking at changing structural certain structures on the property. It could be adding a ramp. It could be putting a lift so that the person that is not able to walk up the stairs can sit on that lift and go up the stairs. One of the things that I tell folks is that if you are looking to make a modification, that is always the responsibility of the person requesting. Unlike the accommodations, the modifications have to be paid for by the resident that is requesting, unless that modification is done in a public and common use area and should have been part of the accessibility features. So if they didn't put curb walks on the sidewalk like they were supposed to, and you request that, they would have to do that on their dime. But if you needed like a new bathroom, then you'll have to pay for the bathroom. Yes, ma'am.
I know a lady that lives in an apartment here, Charlottesville, and she had an amputation.
Mm-hmm.
She has a motorized chair, but she could never get up the stairs to get the jumper to her doctor's appointment.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody physically lifted her up.
Wow.
And the landlord wanted her to move. They would help, because we could try to help her, me and, church.
Yeah.
But they told her they could move her into another apartment, but she liked where she was. So that means, so she never moved. So the landlord, so now I'm understanding what this means. If she doesn't move, then it's up to her.
Yeah, it's up to her. Because, the landlord also offered her, an accessible place. But it's her choice to be there. So if she needs to have a lift, she'll have to pay to install that lift.
Well, we got people to come to look at that, and we couldn't find
Couldn't figure out how to put it there. Yep. Mm-hmm. And sometimes people don't want to move because of the aggravation of moving. I think if they know that they're going to get help, then it's a difference. But, sometimes you have to... It's common sense. If you have to wait for somebody to come get you versus being able to just get out your door and go where you need to go, I would rather get out my door and go where I need to go. So it might be just shyness in her not wanting to move right now. But if you all are going to help her to move, then. Oh. Yeah, but you still have to go and come. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yep. Well, the one thing that the landlord can do is to make sure that whomever is doing the work on the property, that work is going to be done by someone that is licensed. Our agency regulates contractors, and that's something that we always tell audiences. You want to get a licensed contractor, look at the website, make sure when you enter their name or you enter their license number, if you don't get a response, that means they're not licensed. If you get a revoked or suspended, what does that say? Don't hire them. Okay? Now, there's one thing that some of the property managements may not know. If they want fancy material compared to the material that resident was going to use, they have to pay the difference between the cost of the material that they want and the cost that the resident was going to use. I got a call, and the lady said, one of our residents is one of our clients is gonna get a ramp built at her home. The landlord wants an aluminum ramp. This was in a mobile home park. So I said, okay, how much is the ramp that they're gonna build for her cost? She said $5,000. I said, how much is the ramp that he wants? She said $25,000. I said, let me just tell you exactly what you need to tell him. Go tell him that you'll be more than happy to have them install the aluminum ramp if he's willing to pay the $20,000 difference. Conversation changed. I say that because if they didn't know or didn't have a resource to call, they probably would have said, we can't build that ramp. But knowledge is power, and we need to get more and more folks aware of this law so that they'll know what to do. Yes, Ms. Shelley?
Piedmont Housing Alliance is an agent for the Central Virginia area for low-income disabled people that are renting that needs modifications.
Awesome.
That grant up to $4,000.
Nice.
Compliments of VHDA.
Amen. That's wonderful to know.
It's on our website.
Good. And I need to, because I get calls, and they're like, oh, I have to pay for it, and I don't have that kind of money, so I'll.
And can you repeat that so it goes out on, since you weren't at the mic?
Oh.
It's on the rental unit.
Come on.
Go up to the mic and, yeah.
So that they'll know.
Yes. Piedmont Housing Alliance is an agent in Central Virginia for the Rental Unit Accessibility Program. And what that does is gives grants up to $4,000 to help disabled low-income residents that are renting able to have modifications done within that $4,000, and it's a grant. And we teach them and educate them on hiring the contractor like you just spoke about, and they meet with one of our housing counselors.
Very good.
Okay?
Thank you. Thank you. That is awesome to know.
If you're a veteran,
Yeah.
renting freedom is the same thing, and they can own or rent.
Okay.
As long as the disability comes from service duty.
Okay.
And it gets the same up.
I have to repeat that, right?
Yes.
If you're military and disabled military, regardless of income,
if you need a modification and your disability is due to your service, you can get up to $4,000 grant.
you can get up to $4,000 grant if your disability is service related and regardless of your income. So give Piedmont Housing Alliance a call. Your phones are going to be ringing. Some properties may request that you or require that you restore the modification. The restoration has to make sense, and the law says that they can only require restorations in the interior and not the exterior of the property. So whatever you do on the inside, and it has to make sense. You don't widen a door and then make the door narrow again. So you leave it wide. Now, if a person is in a wheelchair and needs for that vanity to be raised, when they leave, if the next person coming in doesn't need that vanity up, they'll have to lower it. And it costs pretty much the same raising it up as it would lowering it. Now, what the property can also do is have extra money. If that person can put some extra money in an escrow account, that way at the end of the tenancy, they can return that money with interest to them. Okay? Maternity leave discrimination was big. 2013. Who would have known that having a baby would get discrimination? But this was what you would call part of disparate impact. There was a neutral rule that says if you're on maternity leave, we will not close on your house. So who was that going to affect? Just the women. Okay? So several banks, including my bank, got in some trouble. Bank of America paid out $20,000 to a doctor, set aside $100,000 for any other woman that was aggrieved. Cornerstone Mortgage, same $20,000 to one woman. $750,000 in escrow for any other woman aggrieved. SunTrust did it in Richmond, and Wells Fargo nationwide. $5 million. 75 women received $20,000 each. They also added another $1.5 million because they know it's nationwide. So as people find out about it, they would, they can claim a piece of their action. But there were also memos that said things like, women don't come back to work after they've had a baby, so you may not want to close on a house. I said maybe they had crystal balls and knew all about what we plan to do. The Me Too. The one place we have not discussed Me Too is in housing, the place where you're most vulnerable. But I have a story for you, and it's right there. A woman's choice, sexual favors or lose their home. It was written by the BBC. This happened in North Carolina. Some of the women were coming out of prison. They wanted to get their children back. And even when they were going to get a mobile home, they had to go in there and clean the house. And as they were cleaning the house, these men would come in and demand sexual favors of them. Their individual stories. Please read them. Please read them. I was surprised that none of the magazines here wrote the story, that the BBC was the one who published it. I have the link to it there too, so you can read it. HUD's final rule on harassment, when it comes to quid pro quo, you're talking about exchanging sex for something in housing. In Norfolk, there was a landlord that was arrested because he propositioned 2 of his residents to exchange sex for rent. Hostile environment is touching, pinching, patting, calling people out of their names, demanding sexual favors. No one, according to HUD, no woman should have to put up with that. But even men are sexually harassed too. Under the law, you have to stop the harassment. You have to take action. Just sitting back and saying, oh, they need to duke it out themselves is not working on the fair housing. If the property management can't have control, then it's, why be in the property management? In a case like this, policies need to be written, and what they need to do is give these policies to all their residents and to staff, because it could be resident to staff, staff to resident, resident to resident. None of that is allowed. Domestic violence. Who would have known that domestic violence would show up in fair housing? But it makes sense. When it comes to domestic violence, it is the #1 reason for homelessness in America. Most of the women that go into shelters, by the time they get into that shelter, they've been a victim of domestic violence for a long time. What happened is most of the properties have ordinances or have that one-strike rule. And that one-strike rule can be detrimental if you're in housing, because you do one thing and they kick you out of there. So one of the cases that really stands out in my mind is that of the city of Norristown, Pennsylvania. They had an ordinance that said that if you call the police 4 times in a period of 3 months, a landlord would be encouraged to evict you. So a young lady that was stabbed in her neck with a bottle and medevaced, upon being released from the hospital, was told that she was being evicted. She ended up having the ACLU take her case on, and she was awarded $495,000 against the city of Norristown, Pennsylvania, that had to change their policies, train all their city employees, including the police, about fair housing. Last year, we did an awesome event. In fact, I had 3 events. And this year, I'm planning on October 4th to do another domestic violence event. Last year we had a young lady by the name of Yawande Austin, and she enlightened us about human trafficking. Many of us don't realize that Virginia is one of the hottest states for human trafficking. I believe we're number 2 in human trafficking. And what we didn't know is that oftentimes the perpetrators could be very distinguished people and even young people. So kids in school are trafficking each other. Pastors, there were 3 pastors in Ohio that were arrested for trafficking, for human trafficking. And one of the things that they say is that even in housing, if you see a constant, back and forth, different people coming and going, you may want to look into what's going on. A young lady was very astute. She was in a diner as one of the waitresses, and she noticed that this young lady that came in with the man, every time she would go up to him and her to ask what they needed to eat or if they needed anything, he would answer and her head would be down. So she positioned herself in a way that the young lady could see her, but the man couldn't. And she mouthed to her, "Are you all right?" And she shook her head. She called 911. She saved that young lady's life. So I know that sometimes we say we mind our own businesses, but I think the world is lacking a lot of empathy and sympathy. And we need to sometimes get involved and speak out when we see wrong happening. So October 4th, we should be having a domestic violence event. I'm sure Harrisonburg will probably want to have theirs this year again. I don't know about Roanoke, but I'm going to centralize it, at least ours, in the Richmond area. So I have to ask this question. Did any one of you in here play when you were young? Did you go outside and you stayed outside all day and all that? Then how comes when I ride around neighborhoods nowadays I don't see children? And too many older people that don't want to hear the children making noise. Young people too. Oh, it needs to be quiet. I'm trying to sleep. Well, they have a right to have use and enjoyment of their home too. Okay? When we talk about families with children or familial status, we're talking about single parents, foster parents, grandparents, pregnant women, anyone seeking legal custody of a minor. The things that they deal with, occupancy. Oftentimes, occupancy, folks want to tell you that if it's 3 people, it's a mom and her 2 children, she may need to have a 3-bedroom apartment. That's not true. The most reasonable occupancy is to have at least 2 people in the same bedroom, at least. And why do I say at least? Because there may be additional rooms in your house that could also serve as sleeping areas. Your common areas are your kitchen, your living room, your bathroom. If you have a den, a study, a basement, those are other areas that people can use as places to sleep. And oh, by the way, your living room, if it has a sofa sleeper, you sleep in it at night and you sit on it in the day. Yes, ma'am.
Is it legal for a boy and a girl to sleep in the same bed?
Absolutely. It's your child? Mm-hmm. Yeah, but if it's your child, I mean, I'm talking in general. It fascinates me that people allow somebody else to tell them how to sleep their family.
But the reason why I asked this because I didn't know it as far as I'm concerned. They rented an apartment, but they said that boys and girls could sleep together, and so they couldn't get a 3-bedroom.
Well, it's pretty much, to me, it depends on what the situation is. Right now, housing, when it comes to subsidized housing, it's limited. In areas like Northern Virginia, the waiting list is like 10,000. You're looking at years.
Well, that bothers me. Because here in our town,
Mm-hmm.
all these 4-story apartments, they're not building nothing for their low-end, the affordable housing.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that legal?
It's,
I mean, Charlie, you know this is the truth. These places these people live in are horrible, some of them. I got friends that live going on? How's this legal?
That's when you need to get with your counsel and all them and
Well,
fight for
that's
what
why
you
I attend
need.
these meetings, but I don't think I don't come. But I'm just saying, how's that legal? What about the people that can't do and they don't have the money? This town does not pay money. I worked here and retired here, so I know. So you got to go where you can live. Something is wrong.
It's called
Discrimination, one. Racial, one, two. I can tell you what it's called.
Charlottesville is
It's horrible.
just areas like
It's getting terrible.
Well, let me just say something.
Northern
A lot of what you see happen has been designed to happen that way. And that's what a lot of people don't. You see, when we talk this stuff and you tell folks, a lot of it was designed that way. It's just like when you look at where the hoods are located.
Yeah.
They usually have a landfill around there or some factory spewing out black smoke. And that was done purposely, just like the natives were put in dump land called reservations.
Well, you know what else is going on? And everybody knows gentrification.
That too.
And that's happening in my neighborhood.
Well, there are different ways you can fight that, but I'm gonna finish this tonight, and then we'll talk about that later on. But a landlord cannot tell you that a boy and girl can't share the same room. That falls under the Nunya rule. It's none of their business. So the only place that there is mention of boys and girls and not using being in the same room is social services. And it's for the foster care program. There's still an issue with that with me. But occupancy, 2 persons per bedroom. 1 person needs 70 square feet, not a big room. 2 or more in a room, 50 square feet each. The bigger the room, the more people. So just because a house may have 3 bedrooms doesn't mean only 6 can be in there. It could be more. Curfews are no. I love when folks say, yeah, we have a curfew proudly. And I said, what's the business necessity? Quiet time is what you have. Quiet time means at the end of the day, whenever the management company decides the time is, it could be 9 o'clock, could be 10 o'clock, could be 11 o'clock. Well, when that time comes around, the noise level goes down, but life still continues. Rules. Management companies have got to watch rules. Because sometimes in writing a rule, you think you've written something so perfect, but that rule can be so discriminatory. There was one young lady in Colorado that wrote that all children needed to be supervised at all times while playing outside. In the next sentence, it said, no skateboarding, no rollerblading, or any extracurricular activities are allowed on this property. So what was the person supposed to do? Okay? So really and truly, the rules have to be watched. And those rules can be so overly restricted, it could ban those who are residents under the age of 18. So we have to be real careful about that. In between Texas and Arkansas, there are 2 sister properties. One of them had that you had to be over 16 to go into public and common use areas. The other one said you had to be 18 years old to go into public and common use areas. Now a 16-year-old is driving a car, and I got to walk with that 16-year-old around the property so that they can get back and forth? Makes no sense. Those 2 properties ended up paying $288,000 between the 2 of them. Disparate impact is now a standard part of the fair housing law. We have several circuit city courts. When they would have a case, they realized that you could give that one case to all the court circuits. And when you give it to them, you got 8 different opinions. So they wanted to standardize the opinions. So disparate impact is a facially neutral housing practice that does not appear to be discriminatory on its face, but when you put it in to work as it's supposed to, it has a discriminatory effect on certain protected classes. That was important, and it's important because it was the way that oftentimes they would find out if there was discrimination going on. So this came in time for this breaking news. and it says, HUD to landlords, rent to ex-convicts, or else face the consequences. So what we're looking at is what they call the new Jim Crow. You look at a population of 13%, that is the 2/3 of the population in prison, and you wonder how can that be? But when you go back to what we read in the Kerner Commission, the policing, the unjust justice, seems to put more of the black and brown behind the bars than anyone else. When they come out of prison, they cannot get housing because they have a record. Because most properties have a blanket policy that says if you have a criminal record, you cannot get housing. Now, what they've asked for housing providers to do is to take each case as an individual case. Look at what you did, when you did it, have you done your time? There's a young man that didn't even do anything really wrong, except he made somebody's daddy mad. The somebody daddy that he made mad is his father-in-law today, 30 years later. But this man also has a record, and he's a sexual offender because she was young and daddy was mad. I think he was like 18 and she was probably like 15 years old, but they're married 30 years. When we talk about the unjust situation, you look at situations like that. And right now, if you don't pay a ticket and they pick you up on a warrant, you have a criminal record. But you didn't do anything that was violent. So the exceptions to this rule is anyone that has been convicted of the manufacturing and distribution of a controlled substance, and anyone that is a lifetime sex offender. They do not get exemptions. Most times, there are landlords that may give them an opportunity, and what they may say is, we'll do a month to month, especially if that person was in rehab. They are now considered a person with a disability. They would do month to month and just see how it works. And then if you prove yourself, they go into the year or whatever it be. But now it gives an opportunity to many of those. And I worry about the women because I say each and every one of us have done something stupid in our lives. Some of us are blessed that we weren't caught. But at some point we did something that we may not be proud of. So I believe in second chances. At least I think everyone deserves it. And what was so amazing, I believe it was in Baltimore, there was a glitch in the justice system and they had to release several criminals that also were violent criminals. They found that putting them on this program, they said if they do anything, they could go right back to jail and serve the time that they were first given. I believe when they had the report, it was about a year ago, and they had been out for 2 years, and not one of them reoffended. Not one. So when they're given an opportunity, oftentimes it works. We regulate advertising. So when it comes to advertising, things like this house is great for a couple is not something that we allow. When you advertise, it's a house. It's a 2-bedroom house. It has a kitchen, whatever. That a mother and her 3 children could live in that house with that 2-bedroom. So you can't just say you think it's best for her. So talk about the house, not who should live in there. If you're using humans in your pictures, then you need to send a picture out there that tells everyone that anyone that wants to live on that property is welcome. So I had a lady get a little upset with me on the Eastern Shore, and she says, oh my gosh, I have to put 8 people in there. I said, no, you get creative. You get a Hispanic man with white hair, sitting in a wheelchair, with his grandson next to him. How many protected classes have I covered? And she said, I don't know. I said 7 out of 8, because the 8th one I don't need, and that's religion. But he's a man. He has gray hair. He's race, color, nationality, the gray hair, elderly, the child, familial status, the wheelchair, disability. The only thing missing there is some insignia that shows what religion he is, and we don't need that. So you just have to get creative. Accessible housing is important. Any housing built after March 13th, 1991 has to be accessible, meaning anyone with a disability should be able to get on the property, around the property, in the unit, around the unit, use the stove, use the vanity, use the bathroom, all that good stuff. If they can't do that, what they're going to do is file a complaint. A property in Richmond had to pay out $600,000 because they did not build the property to the specifications of accessibility. Mortgage banking and homeowners and rental insurance, they use redlining. If you don't know what redlining is, it's just what it sounds like. They look at an area, they draw a red line around it. It could be a circle, it could be a square, it could be a line. What they're saying is this area is not safe to do business with because of the racial and ethnic makeup of the area. So in having that, that's what Richmond the other day, Housing Opportunities Made Equal had a settlement of, I believe, $3 million with Wells Fargo because they were not financing mortgages for African Americans in the city. So another $3 million was paid out. People don't understand that your name, your zip code, your voice can tell folks who you are. I don't care how much you try to fake it. If I got on the phone and I say, hello, I'd like to get a mortgage, they're like, wonder if she's even American. Document. It is always smart for housing providers to write things down. A person has 365 days to file a complaint. They have 732 days to file a lawsuit. When they file a complaint, it is handled by our office. We handle everything, including the attorney. If you file a lawsuit, you have to go through civil court. So that you have to split with the attorney. But we've done some good work. We also do conciliation, which is encouraged by HUD. They want you to at least sit down and kind of talk about it and try to get things, at least ironed out and come to some type of agreement. So I took you all through the highlights of fair housing. I didn't want to bog you down too much. But are there any questions? I know everyone wants to go home. This is my second go-round for the day. This morning I was in Virginia Beach. Wow. So I did a 3-hour class in Virginia Beach. I had close to 200 in that class.
Wow.
And then I drove to the office and then here. So when I get in that car and I drive to Chesterfield County, that's it. I'm done. Yes, ma'am.
It's not a question, but if you will relay that Piedmont Housing Alliance takes in the complaints.
You come and tell them.
Yeah, get up there.
Facebook star.
Yes. We just want to share that Piedmont Housing Alliance for this area, working along with the commission, with Charlene Green in the city, that we do take in complaints if people think that they have been discriminated against for whatever one of the protected classes they are. We also conduct the investigations. And we also try to do the conciliation that Mally was talking about. And what happens is once we get to a certain point, we can send it directly to Richmond, to Mally's office, or we can send it directly to HUD. If we think there is a basis and they have a strong case, we're going to refer it right to Richmond or to HUD. So we just want to share that. You can go to our website, get information, or there's complaint applications or intakes out there on the table as well. But you can visit our website. Hoping Charlene will put it up on her website as well. And also you can go right to DPOR Fair Housing for Virginia. So Was there any questions for Mally? Yes.
One question. The biggest thing I deal with are the barriers to housing with a criminal record. And I really want to do a lot of pushback to private landlords and also to property management companies, especially about the disparate impact when it comes to race, especially about the case-by-case to prove why this person's criminal record is a threat to the safety and security and peace of an apartment complex. Is there any language or anything you could recommend that I could say, or just say how I just said it? I mean,
one of the things that we've been doing is when folks have questions like that, we refer them to home. Yeah, housing opportunities made equal. And the reason, because we have to do everything by the word of the law. Home is the private side, so they can actually advocate. So if there is a situation where their intervention might be necessary, at least you have the help there. Yeah. If you need that number, I could give, okay. Yeah. Most times that's what we do, is try to get folks to go to them. Any other question?
Oh, well, I was going to ask Sherry about,
Shelley.
About, is there any help for people that own the home? You know, like if something happened? Because when I bought my house, I bought it, who's collecting rent? The mortgage now is DA. So is there any help if anything should come up with that?
As far as discrimination?
Or anything, you know?
If it has to do with buying, selling, renting, advertisement, talk to us. But if it's something different than that, then it might be another resource out there to help. So all you need to do is make a phone call us, and ask. And we'll help you find a resource if something's wrong.
Because, see, when I bought my house, I was okay, but now I'm disabled.
Okay, and so I'm gonna just throw this out. If it's something financially, maybe you got different income than what you had back there, there might be some alternatives out there that the lender has available for you. And then we would help you do that, to package up.
Mally, I have one question regarding how the federal government acknowledges sexual orientation when there's discrimination in housing.
Oh, okay. The subsidized, federally subsidized housing, they have a policy that prohibits discrimination based on sexual orientation, whether actual or perceived, gender identity, or marital status. So we know that many of the states may have sexual orientation as a protected class, but the federal government hasn't done that yet. I think they're waiting for, Congress or the Senate or somebody to at least acknowledge that that is necessary. One of the things that was refreshing was to hear a judge in Colorado say that even though we don't have sexual orientation as a protected class, if you can rent to a man and a woman, you can rent to two women or you can rent to two men, because it comes down to sex. So either way, you can still have a case against them.
Any other questions?
Piedmont Housing takes the complaints. So
For sexual orientation?
Any of them.
Okay, cool.
And we'll refer it right to you.
To my coworkers, they'll love you.
I know.
Job security.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, I just want to say, especially for the Office of Human Rights, we are doing our best to try to address your rights as whether it pertains to housing or employment, education, private education, credit, and public accommodation. And so if there are questions that any of you have, please don't hesitate to call us at 970-3023 or check our website or go to our Facebook page at Charlottesville Human Rights Commission. Please check out the Piedmont Housing Alliance website and Facebook page as well, and the Fair Housing Office website. And do you all have a Facebook page? No. Not yet. No, okay. But there is a website for the Fair Housing Office in Richmond. And so we appreciate you all, for the folks who were able to come and join us this evening, and for you at home who are watching us either on Channel 10 or on Facebook Live. Thank you for joining us. We intend to replay this. And again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact any of the offices. Thank you so much for being present. Good night. And last, I definitely want to thank Mally for, there we go. Wakanda forever. I had to do that. But no, thank you so much for all the information. All right, and there's if anyone needs parking, see Todd, and take advantage of the information that is available. Good night.